It was just another quiet evening at the gas station. The kind of evening where nothing much happens and everyone's in a rush to get somewhere else. I was waiting in my car, watching the world move in slow motion under the fading sunlight. Then I noticed him, an old man walking slowly toward the pump. He looked tired, like the weight of many years pressed on his shoulders. His hands trembled slightly as he reached for his wallet. But then something caught my eye. Just as he turned to leave, his hand slipped. A small, shiny object fell from his pocket and hit the ground with a soft clink. Before I could even blink, a teen working at the station, Jake, bent down and picked it up. I saw the way his eyes widened. It was a medal. Not just any medal, but one that looked old and important, like it carried a story buried in its metal. Jake called out to the old man, holding the medal up high. "Sir, you dropped this." But the man didn't stop. He kept walking, his steps growing smaller in the distance until he disappeared completely. I felt a chill run down my spine. There was something about that medal, something about that man, and something about what Jake was about to find out. Because what that teen discovered next changed everything. And it's a story I've never been able to forget. Jake wasn't your typical teenager. At 17, most kids his age were focused on hanging out with friends, scrolling through their phones, or dreaming about weekend parties. But Jake, he worked part-time at the gas station near the edge of town. It wasn't glamorous by any stretch, but it was steady, and it gave him something to do after school. Every afternoon, he'd clock in and man the pumps or stand behind the counter, trying not to let the boredom get to him. He was the kind of kid who kept his head down, did his job, and thought about what came next. He wasn't really sure what he wanted yet, but there was one thing he'd been thinking about a lot lately: joining the military. Not because he was trying to be a hero or anything like that. More because he wanted a chance to prove something. To himself, mostly. Jake didn't come from a big family or have a long list of people counting on him. His mom worked 2 jobs, and sometimes he worried about her more than he let on. But still, he had dreams. Big ones, even if they felt far away. And then there was the old man. Jake noticed him almost every day. The man pulled into the station quietly, always alone, always with that same slow, steady pace. He'd fill up his truck, pay in cash, and leave without saying much. Sometimes Jake tried to catch his eye or offer a smile, but the old man barely glanced up. There was a sadness about him, like he was carrying a secret no one was meant to know. The old man felt out of place, like a forgotten shadow lingering at the edges of town. He never stayed long, but Jake saw enough to know that there was more to him than the tired face and the worn-out jacket. For Jake, the old man was like a puzzle piece that didn't quite fit anywhere, and that medal he dropped, it was the first real clue Jake would ever get about who this man really was. That night, the rain was coming down hard, like the sky was trying to wash everything clean. The gas station was almost empty, just a few cars scattered around. Jake stood under the flickering light by the pumps, wiping rain off his jacket and wishing his shift would end soon. Then, the old man showed up again. His truck rolled slowly into the station, tires splashing through puddles. Jake noticed right away something different about him that evening. Maybe it was the way the man moved slower than usual, or how his hands shook a little more as he got out of the truck. As the old man turned to open the door, something slipped from his pocket. It glinted in the wet light and hit the ground with a soft metallic sound. Jake's eyes snapped to it instantly. Without hesitation, Jake bent down and grabbed the object. It was a medal. Not one of those cheap plastic ones you get at a fair, but a real military medal, heavy, old, and worn with time. "Sir," Jake called out, holding the medal up. "You dropped this." But the old man didn't stop. He climbed into his truck and started the engine, ignoring Jake's calls. The truck roared to life, tires spinning through the wet gravel, and then he was gone, disappearing into the rainy night before Jake could catch him. Jake stood there, the medal in his hand, feeling a strange mix of curiosity and confusion. He flipped the medal over and saw a name engraved on the back: E. Sutherland. The letters were faded but still clear enough to read. Jake had never heard that name before. It sounded important though, like it belonged to someone with a story worth telling. He looked up, half expecting the old man to come back. But the station was empty again. Just the rain, the dim lights, and the secret now resting in Jake's palm. That medal was more than just a piece of metal. It was a key to something hidden, something forgotten, and Jake knew, right then, that this was only the beginning. The moment Jake got home that night, he couldn't stop looking at the medal. It felt heavy in his hand, not just because of the medal, but because of the story it held. He needed answers. So over dinner he showed it to his mom. Her eyes went wide the second she saw the name engraved on the back. Edward Sutherland, she whispered, almost like she was afraid to say it out loud. Do you know him? Jake asked, leaning forward. His mom nodded slowly. There was a man by that name, a war hero around here years ago. People still talk about him sometimes. Brave, quiet, but he disappeared. No one knows what really happened. Jake's heart started to race. A war hero, missing? This was more than he expected. After dinner, Jake sat at the old computer in their small living room and started searching. The internet didn't have much, just a few old news clippings and faded photos of a young soldier in uniform. But the stories all said the same thing. Edward Sutherland was declared missing in action decades ago. No body, no answers, just gone. Jake couldn't believe it. The old man at the gas station, the same one who dropped the medal, was supposed to be missing. How could that be the same person? Determined to find out more, Jake began asking around town the next day. At the library he dug through dusty newspapers, hoping to find any clue. At the local diner, he asked older folks if they remembered Edward Sutherland. Most of them did. They told him stories of a brave young man who went off to fight and never came home. A man who became a legend, and then a ghost. It's a shame, one old man said quietly, stirring his coffee. We all thought he was dead. Jake felt a knot in his stomach. The pieces weren't adding up. How was it possible that Edward Sutherland was still alive? And why was he hiding in plain sight? Everywhere Jake turned, the story was the same. Edward had died in the war, and the town had mourned him like a hero lost too soon. But Jake held the medal tightly, knowing that what he'd seen tonight, what he'd held in his hand, was proof of something no one expected. And the more he dug, the more he realized this wasn't just about a medal or a missing soldier. It was about a secret someone had buried deep. Jake's search had taken him everywhere, but the answers were still out of reach. Then a few days later, a quiet voice at the diner offered a clue. An old woman said she thought the man Jake was looking for lived in a trailer just outside town. It was a place no one paid much attention to, a forgotten spot surrounded by dry grass and rusted cars. Jake didn't hesitate. That afternoon, he got in his car and drove out to the trailer park. The air smelled dry and dusty, and the sun beat down hard. When he reached the spot, his heart pounded. The trailer was old and worn, paint peeled off the walls, and the windows were dusty. But Jake didn't care about any of that. He was there for one reason: to find the old man. The man who had dropped the medal, the man everyone thought was dead. He knocked on the door and waited. After a long moment, it creaked open slowly. The old man stood there. His face was weathered and tired, but Jake could see the surprise in his eyes. You came back, the man said quietly. Jake held out the medal. I found this, it's yours. The man's hands trembled as he took it. For a moment, he looked away, as if the medal carried a weight heavier than anything Jake could understand. I'm not who you think I am, the man said, his voice shaking. Jake shook his head. Yes, you are. You're Edward Sutherland, the man everyone thought died in the war. The old man's eyes filled with tears. I was never supposed to come back. Jake waited, watching as the man's defenses crumbled. Then, in a voice barely above a whisper, the old man told him the truth. I was captured, he said, held prisoner for years. I escaped, but when I came home, everything had changed. My family, my friends, they thought I was dead. He paused, looking down at the medal in his hand. I couldn't face them. I thought they had moved on without me. I thought I was a ghost. Jake felt a lump form in his throat. The man standing in front of him wasn't just an old stranger. He was a survivor, carrying wounds deeper than the ones the war had left behind. I've been hiding, the man said, trying to live with the shame, the pain, the loss. I thought disappearing was easier than facing the truth. Jake reached out and placed a hand on the man's shoulder. You don't have to be alone anymore. For the first time in years, Edward Sutherland let himself believe there might be a way back, a chance to heal, and Jake knew that this moment, the moment he found the truth, was just the beginning of a journey that neither of them could have expected. The trailer was quiet, except for the soft sound of the old man's voice. Edward Sutherland began to share what he'd never told anyone before. I lost friends, he said, staring at the medal in his hand. Good men who didn't make it back. I saw things no one should ever see. The war, it changes you. Jake listened closely, feeling a mix of sadness and awe. This wasn't just a story about a soldier, it was the story of a man who carried the weight of memories that wouldn't let him rest. Edward took a deep breath. When I finally escaped, I hoped for a fresh start, but coming home was the hardest part. Jake's heart tightened as Edward's voice cracked. My wife, she remarried. She thought I was dead. I couldn't blame her. I was gone for so long. It was easier for her to move on. He looked away, pain flickering in his eyes. I felt like a stranger, like I didn't belong anywhere anymore. Jake could see it, the years of loneliness, the silence that had built walls around Edward's heart. But what surprised him most was something else. Beneath the sadness, there was strength. A quiet, unspoken courage that had kept Edward alive through it all. You're not broken, Jake said softly. You're a survivor. That's something no one can take away from you. Edward gave a small, tired smile. Maybe, but I lost my way. I thought hiding was my only choice. Jake shook his head. It's never too late. You don't have to disappear. There are people who want to help, people who remember you, who care. For the first time, Edward looked hopeful. The old man who once believed he was invisible began to see a path forward, a chance to reconnect with a world he thought had forgotten him. Jake wanted to help, not just because of the medal or the story, but because he saw something in Edward, a reminder that even the deepest wounds could start to heal with kindness. That night, as Jake left the trailer, he carried more than just a story. He carried a promise to himself and to Edward, that this was not the end. It was the start of something new. Jake knew that Edward's story needed to be told, but he also knew that Edward wasn't ready to face the world just yet. So quietly, Jake reached out to a local veterans group. He didn't give his name, just enough information about the medal, and the man who was still living quietly on the edge of town. A few days later, the veterans group agreed to hold a small ceremony to honor Edward. When Jake told Edward about it, the old man was hesitant, almost afraid. I'm not sure I deserve this, Edward said, his voice low. I disappeared. I left everything behind. Jake shook his head gently. You don't have to be perfect to be honored. You survived. You made it back. That's worth everything. Slowly, Edward agreed. The day of the ceremony, the small hall filled with people from the town, old veterans, families and neighbors. Some of them had stories about Edward. Some had never forgotten his name. The room buzzed with quiet respect as Edward was called up. For the first time in a long time, Edward stood in front of people who saw him, not as a ghost or a stranger, but as a hero. The applause was soft but sincere. Tears glistened in more than one eye. Then a man stepped forward from the crowd. Jake watched as Edward's eyes widened in shock. It was his son, a grown man, with the same eyes and quiet strength. They moved toward each other slowly, then embraced. Years of pain and silence melting away in that one moment. Edward's tears flowed freely as he held his son for the first time in decades. The reunion was more than just a meeting. It was a healing, a chance to start again. Edward finally felt seen again, not just as a soldier or a shadow from the past, but as a man who had fought battles no one else could understand, and had come home. Jake stood quietly at the back, feeling a deep sense of pride. He had helped bring a lost story back to life, helped a man find his place again, and in that moment, he knew kindness and courage weren't just words. They were the bridge that connected broken pasts to hopeful futures. After everything that happened, I couldn't stop thinking about Jake, about what he'd learned from Edward's story, and what it meant for all of us. Courage isn't just something you find on a battlefield. It's in the small moments, the hard choices, and the quiet battles people fight inside. Edward's courage wasn't just about surviving war. It was about facing a lifetime of pain, shame, and loneliness, and finding the strength to keep going. Shame can bury someone deeper than any grave. It can silence a person, make them disappear even when they're standing right in front of us. Edward's story reminded me that sometimes, the hardest fight is against the darkness inside ourselves. But here's the thing, one small act of kindness, like Jake picking up that medal, can change everything. It can bring someone back from the edge and give them a chance to heal. That moment sparked a journey that no one could have predicted. Jake's respect for Edward grew into something bigger, and it changed him too. After all he'd seen and learned, Jake made a choice. He decided to join the military, not because he wanted glory or pride, but because he wanted purpose, to honor those who had sacrificed, and to face his own future with courage. Edward and Jake kept in touch after the ceremony. They shared stories, laughter, and sometimes quiet moments of understanding. Two lives, connected by a medal, a secret, and the power of being seen. Sometimes the past comes back to us in unexpected ways, but it's never too late to find hope, to find peace, to find a place where you belong. And maybe, just maybe, that's the greatest victory of all. Stories like this remind us that every person has a past, and sometimes a second chance is all it takes to change a life. If this story touched you, please don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe. Your support means the world. And if you believe in the power of kindness, share this video with someone who needs it today. Together we can spread hope, understanding, and the courage to face whatever comes next.